Alrighty, well, thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Andrew Doffney. I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library. Today we have us with Professor Mikal Naeem Nash, who has been a faculty member for 20 years in the history program at Essex County College, where he has taught a wide range of history courses, including his specialty, African American history. He is the author of 2 books and several essays on Islam and African Americans. Professor Nash has become known for his writings and interest in the subjects of African American and Muslim history in New Jersey, and most particularly the greater Newark, New Jersey community. He is also a member of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. So we are very thrilled to have him come and speak again on this topic. But before we start, I just want to go over some housekeeping items. We will be taking questions at the end of the program today, so please feel free to submit your questions at any time, and you can do that using the question box in the GoToWebinar dashboard, or you can email me at adauphinee@njstatelib.org. So please submit your questions at any time, and we'll be sure to get to them at the end of the program. There is a survey that is going to be provided to you at the end of this webinar, as well as in a follow-up email. If you could please complete the survey, we really appreciate your feedback. If you are looking for more information about the African American Muslim community in New Jersey, as I said, he has several books out. One of them is called Islam Among Urban Blacks, Muslims in New York, New Jersey, A Social History. And I will be providing links to these books if you would like to review them in the future in the chat, as well as in a follow-up email. So please be on the lookout for that. One last thing before I start is for those of you who may be unfamiliar with GoToWebinar, this is what your dashboard should look like. If you do not see this dashboard, look for this orange box with a white arrow either at the top left or right hand side of your screen. That will open and close the dashboard, so it's possible that the dashboard loaded closed on you. So you can just click on that to pop it open. If you have any problems and can't figure anything out, you can use this raise hand button at the bottom of that menu, and that will alert me that something's wrong and you're trying to get in touch with me, and then hopefully I'll be able to solve any of your problems that you have. And lastly, if you do have questions, as I said, there's a question box here that you can just type in your questions, hit send, that'll get sent to us, and we'll be happy to answer them at the end of the program. So that is all that I have for today. So I'm going to turn it over to Professor Nash.
Okay. Okay, so I have my screen up. First of all, thank you, Andrew Doffney, for inviting me back to talk about this subject. I want to thank the audience also for being here today. And, you know, the subject of Muslim American history, the story is it's both a story about resistance and assimilation to American culture. So I want us to understand that. That's very important. I want us to think about what makes it necessary to resist aspects of American culture, and what makes it easy to assimilate into American culture. Because if you think about the struggle of African American people, it's been a struggle of resistance from the very beginning, but it's also been a story of assimilation. And so when we look at the Muslim American component to the African American community, that challenge becomes even, I would say, even more magnified. When I realized I think when I was in college, I came across, I got introduced to several personalities who were studying African American history, African history, but also the Muslim side of that history. And I realized very early that if I was going to be able to understand the Muslim community, the Muslim American community, that I had to learn about the people who were already writing on that subject. So there are three names that comes to mind. One is a Kenyan-born scholar. His name is Ali Mazrui. He passed a few years ago, but he's like really a very, very important writer on the African world in the community of Black studies. Then there's another guy. His name is Suleiman Yang. Suleiman Yang was on the faculty at Howard University in DC. And he was from West Africa, but he was also one of the people who was writing about African American history, African history, and the Muslim side of that history. And then the third person that I became attracted to was an American-born personality. His name was Wallace Mohammed. You may have heard of Wallace Dean Muhammad. He was the son of Elijah Muhammad. So it was these three personalities that sort of captured my imagination. And let me say a little bit about them before I get into the narrative. Mazrui and Yang, they were born and raised on the continent of Africa, but Muhammad, in contrast, was a child of the African diaspora. He was born here, raised here in the US, in the Midwest. The American experience of each of them converged on me, I would say, in a very interesting and unique way. As an Africana historian who was also interested in the history of Islam and the history of my country of birth, the United States of America, I have found that the Greater Newark story related to the history of mosque and the Muslim peoples to be one of the truly fascinating American stories that has challenged us in ways similar to what can be found in Black church histories. I learned when I was studying, doing my undergraduate and graduate studies, I learned how closely related the story of the Muslim community was to the church, to the Black church community. But there was a lot written about the Black church, but very little written about the Muslims. So this sort of inspired me to do some research. And let me say that Islam, however, Islam being a minority religion within a minority community, has added perhaps an element, as I mentioned, of both assimilation and resistance to American culture that is not always clear to our fellow Americans. So in this talk, which is a follow-up to my first talk back in February, I want to look at how African Americans who embrace Islam sought to contribute to American society, even as a double minority, and the difficulty of doing that, being both Black, being a minority, as a Black person, a person of African descent, and also being a minority as a member of a faith community. Okay, so I want to show you, I want to say, you can see my slide here. Can you all see the slide? That says 86% of Americans say they want to live in a country where no one is targeted for their religious identity. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. All right. So this is a statistic that was uncovered by the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding. And if we want to know about the Newark narrative, the Newark Muslim narrative, there are three organizations that we must understand something about their history. And I have them listed there: the Moorish Science Temple, the Adin-ul-Lahi Universal Arabic Association, and the Nation of Islam. All right. So I'm going to get to those narratives in the second part, 10 or 15 minutes through the talk. What I want to do now is to give you a backdrop, because this is a 20th century history we're talking about. But that 20th century history is connected to the 1700s and the 1800s. So I want us to understand something about that period so that you can see the connection between Black people who embrace Islam and the Blacks who are brought here through the Middle Passage and who are living on American plantations. So let me go to this slide here. This is 3 Africans who were enslaved here in America. The one on the left, his name is Abdul Rahman. He was enslaved in Mississippi. The one in the middle, Job bin Solomon. And the one to the right is Omar ibn Said. Okay, so the first 2 guys, they actually were enslaved here, but they actually made it back to Africa. It was the last guy, the guy to the far right, Omar ibn Said, who never made it back. And his story to me is very interesting when we think about the history of the African Americans. And I'm going to tell you why when I get to this narrative. Okay. Okay, to the right, Omar ibn Said's use of Arabic literacy as opposition to slavery. This was an article, the name of an article by Akil Kahira, who was a historian architect. The article draws attention to an enslaved African in America who wrote his own slave narrative in Arabic, or Ajami, which is known as an African language in Arabic script. And he wasn't the only one who could do that, who could write in Arabic. There were, as quiet as kept, there were quite a few, hundreds of thousands of African Muslims living on American plantations who could write in Arabic. This shows that there is an Islamic heritage in America among the African Americans who embraced Islam in the 20th century, even if they did not know very much about the heritage. And those 3 communities that I mentioned, in the beginning, they didn't know a whole lot about these Africans that had come here through the Middle Passage. They knew some things, but not a whole lot. They didn't know what we know today. I want to have a brief word on Omar because unlike Abdul Rahman and Job bin Solomon, the first two, Omar, as I said, did not go back to Africa. Rather, he is buried here in the United States, and his story is a part of the Carolina narrative. He was actually in both Carolinas. He started out as a slave in North Carolina, and then he escaped to South Carolina, where he pretty much remained. Omar was born a free person in Africa, then enslaved and brought to America through the Middle Passage, and then freed again after the Emancipation Proclamation was issued before he died. I think this was 1863. I think this is significant given that Omar, when given the opportunity to return to his native Africa, chose not to do so. Now, he didn't choose not to do so because he liked being a slave, but there were other circumstances. But the point I'm making is that makes him an African American, like many of us in the 20th century, beginning in the 20th century, who started to leave the church and choose Islam. So again, the first two guys, they actually went back to Africa after being enslaved here. But Omar, to the far right, never made it back. And even though he had an opportunity to go back, he chose to stay here. Very interesting. There were others like him who were buried here as well, whose stories have been preserved. People like, we have a Bilali Muhammad, we have Salih Bilali, who were living as enslaved people on the islands off the coast of Georgia, namely Sapelo and St. Simon's Islands. And we also have very limited data of an enslaved African Muslim woman as well, whose slave name history records as Old Lizzie Gray. And this lady became famous for her statement that Christ built the first church in Mecca. She was actually referring to the Kaaba in Mecca, in Arabia, where the Muslims make the pilgrimage. If you can think about some of the pictures of Malcolm X on the pilgrimage. But this was this Kaaba, this house of worship was built by the Old Testament figure Abraham and his son Ismail or Ishmael. And that story, a lot of people don't know who are not Muslims, but that story is also in the Quran. It's not just an Old Testament and biblical story, but it's a Quranic story as well. So the point here is to show you the influence that Islam had upon these Africans that I'm saying were brought here through the Middle Passage, who managed to hold on to their Islamic faith even as slaves. Now I want to get back to Omar and how he used his literacy as opposition to slavery. Literacy meaning he could read and write in Arabic, or the African language that they call Ajami, which is it's an African language, but it's the linguists say it uses the Arabic script. So Omar, what he does is that he confronts his enslavers using his ability to, to read and write. And he says this quote from the Quran. He says, "It is he meaning God, who has made the earth subservient to you. Walk about its regions and eat of his provisions. To him all shall return to the resurrection. Are you confident that he who is in heaven will not cause the earth to cave in beneath you, so that it will shake to pieces and overwhelm you?" And this is just a verse from the Quran, a chapter in the Quran called Mulk, which means sovereignty. The verse is about sovereignty, meaning that sovereignty belongs to the creator. It belongs to God, not to the human being. And so this was Omar's way of defending himself spiritually against the spiritual abuses of his enslavers, who would, as we know, use the Bible to try and justify enslavement. Of course, we remember Nat Turner, who also used the Bible as a means of liberating his people. So you can think of Omar using the Quran in a similar way. He uses the Quran to confront his white Christian enslavers. I want us to think about the many horrors of slavery. Just take a minute and use your imagination and just think about, what African people had to endure on the slave ship, coming here through the Middle Passage, and on the plantations. Of course, it's not a pleasant sight at all. But when you think about it, to help you understand how African Muslims dealt with that, it reminds me of a statement made by one of our scholars, Muslim American scholar too. And she was from Dr. Suleiman Yang. She was from, she is from Senegal. And one of the things she said was that, in explaining about these African Muslims and how they dealt with that horrible experience, she said, if you have faith, you will think that all of this happened for a reason that you don't know, but that ultimately things would get better. And so, like the Quran, when I think about Omar and maybe why he chose not to go back, I'm sure he was thinking of that, because he wrote his he wrote his own narrative in Arabic. And this is one of the things that really fascinated his enslavers. But he also had, some historians say that there was something going on in Africa that was in his memory that perhaps made him not want to go back. Again, this should not be construed to suggest that he liked being a slave, but it just helps us to understand, the complexity of the African experience, and maybe how some Muslims may have grappled with being here. I want us to reflect on um, that statement, if you have faith, you will think that all of this happened for a reason that you don't know, but that ultimately things will get better. There are lots of verses in the Quran that talks about patience. There's also verses in the Quran that talks about self-defense. And there were many slave rebellions led by Muslims in this part of the world too. But it didn't happen here in the US. I think it is important to think about that, because we should understand the psychology of the Africans who embrace Islam. Most of the Africans that were here, I wouldn't say that most of them were Muslims. And we know from research that, they held on to their traditional religions, the traditional religions that they brought here from Africa. But again, hundreds of thousands of African Muslims being in America helps us to understand why in the 20th century, Black people are turning to Islam. We generally think sometimes that the influence of Islam in America came as a result of maybe Middle Eastern or Southeast Asian influence. But when we understand that Islam had already been here because Africans had brought it here, then that gives us a different narrative. So going back to one of the scholars, this person really, he kind of introduced my work to the academic community, Kahira. He says that what Omar is doing is challenging the religious sanction of slavery and undermining the practice of granting slaveholders dominion, sovereignty over other human beings. As we know, many whites use the Bible to justify enslavement of Africans. So there's a book written about Omar. It's written by a Yale scholar, and the book is called A Muslim American Slave, The Life of Omar ibn Said. This book is an analysis of the narrative that Omar wrote, and from studying it, we can get into his mind. We can understand him better. But we also have other things that we can refer to help us understand this backdrop. We have some oral history narratives from the WPA, Work Progress Association, that have been published in the 1940s. We also have some very good secondary sources, and probably the most popular one is Alan Austin's book, African Muslims in Antebellum America. This book came out in 1984, and it was followed a few years later, more than a decade and a half, by another very important work that those of us who are in this field refer to. And that book is called Servants of Allah, African Muslims Enslaved in the Americas. And that book was published by Suleiman Yang in 1998. Okay. So I want to now I want to get into the 20th century narrative. Black American Muslims in New Jersey are connected to the history that I just described. Can you all see my slide here that I'm reading from?
Yes.
Black American Muslims in New Jersey therefore have pioneered the struggle to strengthen our country's commitment to both racial and religious freedom and justice as a core American value, some say, intended by our country's founders. And I do argue that, although I know it's controversial. And since we know that many of them, including Thomas Jefferson, had been exposed to Islam, this is not a far-fetched idea, and it could very well be an influence of Islamic ideals on our country. And we can talk about that later. Now, when we talk about resistance, I'm getting ready to get into the 20th century. This is what we have to keep in mind. What are we resisting? What were African people resisting, whether they were Muslims or non-Muslim? What were people in general, what were they resisting? Well, we have to acknowledge the fact that we in this country had a rocky start as we suffered a plague of sorts in the establishment of racial laws. What the freedom fighters from that time until now have been resisting is what I have listed here. The laws started in Virginia, these racial laws, and eventually took hold in the remaining colonies. I just put 3 examples so that we can see how our country was structured. We're talking a lot now about structural racism. Well, this is where it begins. And this is just an example of what is happening in Virginia. 1661, an act is passed punishing any servant who runs away with a person held as a slave. The punishment increases time to be served. Then 1667, there's a law made, conversion to Christianity will not end slave status. 1669, they make another law. A so-called master who is correcting an obstinate person held as a slave may kill that person during this process, and there is no crime of murder. So when we talk about resistance, this is what freedom fighters across the racial divide were resisting. So you notice that I put, I put a couple of examples dealing with race, but I also, since I'm dealing with a faith community, I also wanted you to also see even how, how religion was used in a similar way that race was to control people. Okay. So this man here, he was an artist. Peel, his name was Wilson Peel, Charles Wilson Peel. And he was prominent during the Revolutionary era. And he was with George Washington and, fought on the Patriot side. And he painted several portraits of George Washington. Okay. This person also painted this man's picture, who was another African brought here through the Middle Passage. Again, I'm showing you this so that you can understand that there is a background, there is a history that is right here in America. There's an Islamic history. This man is another person who never went back, but he stayed, bought property, and paid taxes. He dealt with the indignities of being black in America. But he was said to have openly practiced his religion as well. Okay. This is another picture of Omar. The guy here on the right, this is him here. This is another photo. So some of the Europeans took some interest in these Africans, interestingly enough. So 20th century now, when African Americans who turned to Islam learned about this heritage, it helped to shape our consciousness, or their consciousness, our consciousness, in terms of who we were in relation to other blacks who did not share our faith, but had to contend with the same pressures of being black. But it also helped to shape our consciousness in terms of who we were in relation to other Muslims who did not share our experience, but had to contend with the same pressures due to a common faith. So the challenge for these African Muslims was a very complex one. Again, they are a double minority, not just black, but they're black and they're Muslim. Like their ancestors, these people from the 20th century, some of which created little African communities in the South to preserve their identities, African American Muslims created their new African communities as well to preserve their identities as Africans, as Muslims, and Americans, all of which they would embrace. We see in the 20th century how African American Muslims, they're not just resisting racism, but they are also striving to embrace American culture. They're determined to be, they are determined, sorry. They're determined to be recognized as Americans. I'm going to give you some examples of that. Like right around the 20th century, this was the early part of the 20th century. I would say the first quarter of the 20th century. We're talking about, if I mention some key personalities, people like Marcus Garvey, who is well known. Du Bois is there. Booker T. Washington is there, but he dies, I think, around 1913, 1914. Marcus Garvey actually wanted to meet Booker T. Washington. He's coming from Jamaica, but he never got the chance to meet him because he had died. Booker T. Washington had died. But Garvey is here, let's say in 1914. Marcus Garvey leaves Jamaica and he's in America. And he has he has an impact on Black America. And interestingly enough, Tony Martin, his biographer, said that Garvey had 31 chapters of the UNIA right here in New Jersey, which I just thought was fascinating, Let me say something about Garvey. Garvey is important to this story, although the Muslims kind of go in a different direction. But Garvey, he had established alliances with Muslims, many of which were foreign born. They had like Indian background. It was a group called the Ahmadiyya movement. And he was affiliated, we know, with this guy named Dus Ali, who was an Egyptian Sudanese Muslim from the continent of Africa. And he met Dus Ali in London, England. Garvey and Dus had a Pan-Africanist and anti-imperialist vision for the Black world. Garvey was more a supporter of racial unity than he was of class unity. As a result, he was viewed with suspicion by the leaders of labor unions. You know, we're nearing Labor Day, and I wanted to make some references to labor history as well. He and A. Philip Randolph, the radical Black socialist and founder of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, which was the premier Black labor union of those times, also did not see eye to eye on how to advance the race. So we also know that Noble Drew Ali, and I have a photo of him, Noble Drew Ali. This is Noble Drew Ali. He was the founder of the Moorish Science Temple of America. He also thought highly of Garvey, referring to him as the John the Baptist of his movement. This, however, is where I see some discrepancies in the Muslim American narrative as it unfolds. Unlike Garvey, Drew Ali was American born and Muslim. As such, he defended the rights of Muslims, and in fact, he was a pioneer in doing so. He becomes a champion of Americanization, so to speak, because although he is a Black man adversely affected by Jim Crow, he believes very strongly that he must protect his religion, his faith. You know, he has there was a quote, I was looking for it, this quote, goodness. I have to come back to it. There's a quote that he had where he sends this letter. He's referring to the Christians and how they're not, the Black church, how they're not acknowledging the Mohammedan religion. He's referring to Islam as the Mohammedan religion. And he's very upset about that, you know. And he tells them that, you know, whether you are, you know, whatever your faith is, that it is protected by the American Constitution. This is what Drew Ali tells the people. He tells his parishioners this, referring to people in the Black church. So I'm saying that to show you again how this dual struggle of dealing with race and also dealing with religious freedom is so very important to 20th century African American Muslims. Now, he's not making references to any of the African Muslims I spoke of earlier, but he considers himself and his community as being a part of the Muslim world. He claims Morocco and Africa as the place where his movement has an ancient heritage, yet he also believes things that are different from the people in Morocco and many places in the Muslim world, but also quite similar. And an example of some of the differences, like his followers refer to him as a prophet, which people in the Muslim world didn't do that. Of course, this is also before the Nation of Islam. This is very important. We're talking about 1913, around 1913, when this influence begins to take hold in Newark, New Jersey. Another difference is that they had their own holy book. They knew about the Holy Quran, but they didn't follow it so much. They extracted some things from it and they used that as their holy book. And they did not practice all the 5 pillars of Islam, such as the Salat, the prayer, or fast in Ramadan, or make the Hajj. I mean, you got to remember, you're talking about the first quarter of the 20th century. This is, segregation is at its height. Blacks are dealing with, racism, but now they are also claiming a foreign religion, if you will. So this is how it sort of started in the Black community. Now, some of the similarities, in spite of those differences, some of the similarities, I want you to listen to this. Drew Ali, in describing his community in terms of what they believe, he says, Islam is a very simple faith. It requires man to recognize his duty towards God, Allah, his creator, his fellow creatures. It teaches us the supreme duty of living at peace with one's surroundings. It is preeminently the religion of peace. The name means peace. The goal of man's life, according to Islam, means peace with everything. The cardinal doctrine of Islam is unity of the Father, Allah. We believe in one God. Allah is all God, all mercy, and all powerful. He is perfect and holy, all wisdom, has all wisdom, all knowledge, and represents all truth. He is free from all defects, holy, transcendent. He is personal to us insofar as we can see his attributes working for us, but he is nevertheless impersonal. He is infinite, perfect, and holy. Nor do we believe that God is helpless, inactive, in an inert force. Nothing happens without his knowledge and will. He neither begets nor is he begotten, because these are traits of frail and weak humanity. This unity of Allah is the first and foremost pillar of Islam, and every other belief hangs on it. That was a statement by this man, Noble Drew Ali. So the statement, if you know anything about Islam, about universal Islam, it's very similar to what Muslims around the world believed at that time and today. For he did confront a foreign-born Muslim who questioned him about his community's beliefs. This guy was named Sadi Majid. He was from Sudan, and there's some research on that. I'm moving fast because I see that I got to leave some time for a few questions. Let me wrap this up. All right, so let me just show you some connections too here. I'm going to show you like this here. This is a picture of his community. Look at the symbolism. Look at the American flag here. This is a grocery store. This is right here in Newark that they had. And so they were very, very keen on maintaining their identity as Muslims, defending Black people against racism, and also claiming their American heritage. It's so much. I see. I have a lot more to show you because there's some more connections that need to be made. But okay, this man here is a very important figure because he was a part of this group. He was a part of Drew Ali, but he left and he started a new organization in Newark. This guy I mentioned in the first part, he had left the United States. He went to Egypt. He stayed for 5 years. He came back and he started a Sunni Muslim group. Okay. Here's a picture of Elijah Muhammad. And this is a picture of the community under Elijah Muhammad here in Newark. Okay, and this picture is from the 60s. This is from the 1960s. This picture here is of the Moorish Americans, where you see the flag and everything. This is from around probably the late 40s or 50s. I have to verify that. But there is a connection between this group and the Nation of Islam and this man who went to Egypt, came back, and started his community. Okay, I'm going to skip that one and go to this. This is Noble Drew Ali's community. This is somewhere between 29 and 47, 1929 and 47. Notice the symbolism, the American flag. They have the fezzes on, and they have the Islamic attire. And they have also their organizational flag right here. Okay, so again, it's a kind of triple heritage. We're Black, we're people of African descent. We are American, and we are Muslim too, and we claim all of that. We embrace it all. Now, I'm going to end here. I jumped around because the time is out. But does anyone recognize who that is? That's Wallace Mohammed. That's Elijah Muhammad's son. He's carrying the American flag, and he is again, he feels connected, and he's trying to connect his community. This is after his father passes. He's trying to also connect his community to that earlier heritage. These Africans coming here and being enslaved on American plantations, and then coming back to Islam here. And now he's also claiming this heritage. Not only are we Black people, but we are Muslims, we are Americans, and we demand the rights that we should have under the Constitution. I'm going to end with this slide here. This is somewhere in the 70s, Wallace Mohammed with Mayor Gibson, who was the first Black elected mayor of the city of Newark. So he was very supportive of public officials who put a lot of emphasis on good governance. And he was also very supportive of, Black people and Muslims becoming politically active. This is the Black Heritage Day Parade in Newark. Okay. So let me stop there. I'm sorry. I know we only have a few minutes left, but let me just stop there and see if anyone has any questions or if I can clarify anything that I said. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Professor Nash. Yes, if anybody has any questions, please submit them using the question box on the dashboard, and we'd be happy to answer them for you. So let's see, the first question is, how did African Muslim teachings brought back by Americans who traveled abroad shape the 20th century Muslim community?
Well, I think it helped to, for example, Iseldain, this guy, he went abroad. He was probably the first Black American to go abroad. And he came back, and in the 1930s, he started a Muslim community, that community called the Adinollahi Universal Arabic Association. And the people who were a part of that community are still around, like their descendants. They're still active in the community, and they are recognized scholars in the religion here in the U.S. and throughout the country and around the world, actually. So I know also Wallace Mohammed sent a lot of people to overseas, maybe to learn maybe language and to come back and teach people in the community. This was even done under Elijah Muhammad. So I think it, it helped to shape the establishment of Muslim community development here in the United States, people going abroad and coming back. Does that help?
Yeah. All right. Next question is, why did the 20th century Muslim community develop so strongly in the Newark area?
Yeah. One reason I think is because Newark was a like a town where a lot of people were coming here. It was in the early part of the 20th century, it was thought of as a like a land of opportunity, and Black people from the South. Drew Ali was from the South. Isildeen, this guy, he was from the South. They came here hearing about that. They eventually they settled here in Newark, and they were able to establish a community here. So I know Drew Ali didn't stay, but his followers stayed. All right. But Isildeen actually stayed. He came in 1913. He left, then he came back in the 1930s, and he stayed until he died, which was in 57. He's buried in Linden. So Newark, we have to think about Newark, what was, Newark was considered a progressive place at that time. And a lot of people were coming here. It wasn't as busy as New York as well. Those are things that come to me. We could also, let me also add something to that. I would also say this group here is important, like the Moorish Americans, that picture that I showed you. They had a large following in the first quarter of the 20th century. I mean, they had thousands of followers here in Newark. They had by 1925, they had chapters in other states. At least it escapes me the exact number, but I can safely say at least 7 or 8 states they had members. So they had a national following. But Newark was really the place where they established their foundation. And when I give this lecture, I always mention how at that time you didn't see foreign-born Muslims in Newark at that time, not in a community sense. You might see individual. The foreign-born Muslims came much later, like the 60s, 70s. They came much later. Up until that point, you have Black people. People are migrating from the South, and they're settling. They're coming here through the Great Depression, and they're settling here. This is one of the places where they're settling. And so all these Black people claiming Islam, it sort of explains why you see so many Black people associating with Islam in the greater Newark community today.
All right. Next question. In regards to enslaved people, do we have any records or evidence of concentrated populations of Muslims in the United States or the Americas in general?
Yes. Georgia is a very important state for Black Muslim settlement. Okay, and this is, we can say, in the like the latter part of the 19th century, before the Civil War, the second half of the 19th century. And they even defended the United States um, in the Civil War. Some researchers have found that their defense of the United States came even as early as the War of 1812. We have a book out about Muslim veterans where the author found even a few Muslims who were a part of the Revolutionary War, experience. But Georgia is a very important state when we think about the concentration of numbers of Muslims. Wallace Mohammed was his name, and the other guy that I mentioned, Salih Bilali, they were on these islands and they commanded respect among the slave population as well as the slave owners. So a lot has been written on that. If you get Suleiman Yang's book and Alan Austin's book, you can learn more about that. And I make some references, several references to that in my books as well.
All right, next question. Were there places in central New Jersey where there were settlements of Muslims?
Yes, I just, that's interesting. Now, I'm still researching that, but what I learned, because I lived in central Jersey for about 4 years. This was probably, let me see, this was in starting maybe like around 2012, something like that. And I learned that a lot of the people that's in the Trenton, Ewing area, a lot of the people down there actually started in Newark. I met quite a few people. They were a part of the Newark Nation of Islam community. I think I met one person who was a part of this Moorish community, right? But more people I met who were a part of the Nation of Islam experience. This is the Nation of Islam. And they were now living in Trenton or Ewing, and they were still practicing Muslims. In fact, we did, I don't think I mentioned this in my first talk, but we did a program about the history of Islam in the what they call the Delaware Valley, because they thought of themselves as being more connected to the Philadelphia area as opposed to the Newark area, even though a lot of people who were a part of the community had got their start in Newark, so.
All right, next question. Do you have any research suggestions for those doing family history research on Muslim ancestors?
Yes. What I can say, I know there is an author who I met many years ago. He has a museum. His name is Amir Muhammad. And he wrote the book, Muslims in America. In fact, I'm looking at it. Muslims in America, 7 Centuries of History. Now, I went to several of his seminars over the years. I've known him for years. And in one of his talks, he talked about his use of genealogy because he traced his own history, his own family history. I'm in the like early stages of doing that. So I don't have too much direct advice I can give you, but I can refer you to people that I think could really, might be helpful to you. Like I said, his name is Omar Mohammed, and his book is Muslims in America: 7 Centuries of History. And he used genealogy to learn about his own family heritage.
All right, well, I don't have any more questions right now, but we can give it a moment or two. Somebody said thank you, Professor, for all the wonderful information that you've provided.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Alrighty, well, yes, thank you everybody for attending. Thank you again, Professor Nash, for presenting on this topic. I wish everybody to stay safe, stay well, and please, if you have any questions or you think of something later, you can certainly email the library, or I'll be sending out some information too with Professor Nash's email address. So if you wanted to get in contact with him directly, you'd be able to have that. So again, thank you everybody. Thank you, Professor Nash, and have a great day.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you. All right.